for that. Let me turn on another device. So many recording instruments here. We're going to make sure you're famous. So, because we know how much you need that and how much you crave it. Thank you everyone for coming today to the 2022 New Critics Conference keynote talk. This conference was created over a decade ago by Professor Bianca Tredenick and co-sponsored by the English Club Parnassus. The pandemic put the conference on hiatus, so we're very happy to be bringing it back to life as we tentatively enter the aftertime. There are many people whose contributions have been essential to seeing this conference back on its feet. First, I want to acknowledge Haley Eustace and Abigail Hubbard and the members of Parnassus who are the driving force for resurrecting New Critics. Thank you very much. Indeed. I want to thank as well Dr. Akira Yatsuhashi, Dr. Amy Dowdy, Dr. Yatsuhashi for being co-advisors on this thing and seeing it through, and Dr. Dowdy for running the panel on Percy Jackson. That was such an active conversation. I was so impressed. The energy just didn't stop. Very interesting to witness. Also, I'd like to thank Dr. Suzanne Black in the English department for their support, and Ruth Carr of the English department for her logistical support and making sure that many of the things that have to happen to make this a type of event take place. She's the one who kicks me in the butt to make sure it's done. Also, would like to thank the Student Association, the Department of Education and Educational Technology, and the Committee for Public Events for their support to help bring us our keynote speaker. I should also add, well, I was going to have this little thing about we're going to have a raffle. I don't think we need to have a raffle. We've got copies of one of Tobin Anderson's novels, and so everybody who hasn't had a copy of that can get a copy, and I'm sure he would be very happy to sign it for you. So we'll skip that part. It is a great honor and privilege for me to introduce this afternoon's speaker, Matthew Tobin Anderson. To say that Mr. Anderson, I'm going to be very formal right now, is a prolific author is an understatement. To his credit are 25 books for young adult readers in multiple genres. His novels include Thirsty, Feed, and the 2-volume Astonishing Life of Octavian Nothing, which won the National Book Award. His genres are wide-ranging, including horror, dystopian science fiction, historical fiction, and biography. His 2017 novel, Landscape with Invisible Hand, about an alien takeover of Earth that surprisingly resembles disaster capitalism, is, as we sit here right now, being made into a film that will star Josh Hamilton, Tiffany Haddish, and Asante Black. Anderson's Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew-esque series, Pals in Peril, written for middle grade readers, is an absurdist and hilarious take on kids' adventure stories. This list does not include his 2 graphic novels and the picture books he has authored about such topics as the avant-garde composer Erik Satie and the Baroque composer George Friedrich Handel. For his efforts, Mr. Anderson has won the aforementioned National Book Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Award, the Boston Globe Horn Book Award, and the Michael L. Prince Award for Excellence in Young Adult Literature. A number of qualities tie these vastly different books written in different genres together. One is their attention to detail, especially voice. To capture the voice of disaffected youth in Feed, Mr. Anderson studied magazines like Maxim and Teen Vogue to capture the attitude and slang of teenagers and came up with this stunning opening sentence. "We went to the moon to have fun, but the moon turned out to completely suck." He spent years studying the language and syntax of 18th century American English in order to adequately create the voices for his Octavian Nothing books. Another quality is their shared sense of satire. Anderson deftly removes the veneer from adults, technology, bureaucracy, consumer culture, systems of all sorts. But he takes his young readers very seriously. He knows they are capable of understanding sophisticated ideas and exercising critical thought. Not only are they capable of exercising critical thought, it is vital that they do so. If we're going to ask our kids at age 18 to go off to war and die for their country, he told the Washington Post, I don't see any problem with asking them at age 16 to think about what that might mean. Of course, such an approach to writing for young people has its risks. Feed is number 68 on the American Library Association's list of the 100 most banned books in America. This, by the way, is above Orwell's 1984, which ranks number 79.
I did not know that. That is
Nabokov's Lolita, which ranks number 73, and Mansbach's children's classic, Please Shut the Fuck Up, which is number 69. So you are right above. Or no, not please. Go the fuck to sleep. I'm sorry. I couldn't even read my own typing here. His Pals in Perils book, Jasper Dash and the Flame Pits of Delaware, won the opprobrium of the governor of Delaware himself, who I believe has banned Anderson from ever entering the state. But along with serious subject matter comes a generous sense of humor. The grimmest stories of technological dystopia use humor to disarm the forces that would strip his characters and us of their humanity. As a side note, I should say that I'm particularly proud to introduce Tobin, notice the turn toward the informal, as a friend. We first met when we were graduate students at Syracuse University. He in the MFA Creative Writing program and me in the Doctoral Literature program. On first learning his pedigree, educated at Harvard and Cambridge universities, and regarding his panache for stylish dressing, it would have been easy to feel intimidated by him. Tobin was never anything but humble, curious, generous, and a person you'd want to spend time with because he was funny and you were always bound to learn something from him. It has always been my pleasure to know Tobin and to follow his amazing career, and it's now my pleasure to introduce him to you this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. See if the computer wakes up. Yeah.
We put our little microphone.
It is great to be here. This is such a neat event. Y'all presenting to each other. Is this actually on? Does it matter?
There's a little button.
Well, yeah. There's mute. Oh, no. There we go.
Is it?
There we go. Oh, okay. So, this is a superb event. I went to one of the sessions this morning and only wish that I could have heard more. I loved what y'all were talking about. And in particular, those who, I don't think any of the presenters are here from that one this morning, the one on demons in possession and the foreign, but I'm actually going to be talking about a lot of those things in this talk. So thank you. Also, I did, on the way up here, the word SUNY Oneonta kept on running through my head as I drove here, because it was on, and so I have come up with a school cheer. I feel like it should be like SUNY Oneonta, SUNY Oneonta. You know, it rolls off the tongue. So, all right, so the name of my talk is The End of All Our Exploring. And I'm going to talk about travel, about the foreign, and about why writing is important. Fiction writing, but also nonfiction writing, like you've been exchanging in the course of the conference today. And I'm going to talk in particular about the idea of estrangement. First, I'm going to tell a quick story about a trip I took a few months ago. Then I'm going to speak more broadly about writing and the theory of writing. And finally, then I'll talk about a few of my books and how they connect with that theory. So I hope that it will be useful as a way for you to think about your own work going forward. So first, my travel story. So I have a friend named Erin, and she leads a much more interesting life than I do. She studies art crime, stolen art, forged art, and art that has been destroyed. And by contrast, I just live in Vermont, a very rural part of Vermont. It's important in life to have friends who are actually more interesting than you. Just as one example, I called her a few months ago and I was like, hey, Erin, what's going on? What's going on? She lives down in Manhattan. What's going on? She was like, oh, I went to the best party last night. It was a publishing party, a launch party for this woman's book, and it was held in a hotel in this sort of like glassed-in penthouse looking out over the whole city, and we were served dessert off of the naked body of the author. And she was like, all these people from the New Yorker were there and the New York Times. And I was like, well, by contrast, last night I ate a very large block of cheese and fell asleep on the sofa in my clothes, and then woke up this morning and was like, already dressed. Score. So she leads a much more interesting life than I do. And she's been working on a case recently about a sacred statue stolen from Nepal. It's a 15th century statue of Lakshmi and her consort Narayan. So it combines the two, male and female in one. It's a gender non-conforming statue. And literally it has sort of one breast and then one sort of superhero pec, and its clothes would have traditionally signaled to people that it is both male and female at the same time. With the idea being that, Lakshmi and Narayan are they transcend the sort of the accident of human biology. They transcend the animal. They are something that is higher than human gender and human formulation. So this has been sitting for some centuries, since the 15th century, in this shrine in Patan, which is just a little roadside shrine. And then in 1984, it was stolen. Probably someone paid off the police. It's quite a heavy statue. It's made of stone. And it disappeared, and no one knew where it was for 40 years or so. And then an artist came along. This may look like a photograph, but it is in fact, believe it or not, a photorealistic painting by this American artist named Joy Davis. And what she does is, she lives in Kathmandu, or lived in Kathmandu, and she decided to, because so many statues were being looted and being sold in the West, what she was going to do is, she was going to do this series of paintings where she restored the statues to their settings. So always the surroundings are always done in this sort of grayscale, and then in the center, she will do she will paint the artifact itself in gold leaf, to give it that sense of the numinous or the godlike. In this case, the real thing is actually stone, not gold. But so to give this sense of kind of like the sacredness of that object. So she had painted this Lakshmi Narayan statue that disappeared. And then one day, about a year and a half ago, she's walking through the Dallas Museum of Art, and she's like, wait a second, that's the damn thing I painted. That is the statue that was stolen from Patan. So she contacted the museum, and she was like, you've got a stolen statue on display right now. And they were like, well, how do we really know it was stolen? And she's like, well, because there's a full-page illustration of it in a book called Stolen Religious Art of Nepal. So she contacted this friend of mine, Erin, who deals with this kind of thing. And so Erin, with the FBI, got the statue pulled from the Dallas Museum of Art and repatriated, sent back to Nepal. So I was talking to Erin, and she was like, oh, there's this big ceremony that's going to happen when the statue returns to its shrine after 40 years. Am I getting that math right? Yeah, kind of. And I said, are you going? And she's like, no, it's in like 2 weeks. It's in Nepal. Of course I'm not going. I was like, wait 1 second. It's a pandemic. Let's check what the airplane rates are. And I was like, it is actually cheaper to fly to Kathmandu right now than to fly to California to visit my sister in Petaluma. So I said, look, I'll go if you'll go, because I am always up for a plan that sounds stupid and haphazard. And she's like, okay, sure, let's go to Nepal. We're going to Nepal. So I was extremely excited. Extremely excited. I had been to Nepal before. And it's an incredible place. I don't know if any of you are from Nepal or have relatives in Nepal. If so, you know it's an incredibly beautiful country, but one with huge challenges. There's a very corrupt government. There are these tensions between the rural and the urban. It still is recovering from a Maoist insurgency and a huge earthquake that still mark the daily life of many people. But I have this huge interest in architecture, and as you can see, their architecture is just absolutely fantastic. They are supposedly the ones that gave the pagoda form to the world. The other thing is, I'm from a small New England town, a town that in fact was almost proud of being born. So to go instead to a place where it seems sort of full of wonders, and in particular, every street corner there and every little shrine has its own fantastic story. So for a storyteller, it's an amazing place. This, for example, and this is a, sort of one of the more famous odd facts about Nepal, there is a living goddess. That is to say, a girl between the age of 6 and 12 who is felt to have filling her the spirit of the goddess Kumari, and so she lives, this girl will live from the ages of roughly 6 to roughly 12 in this palace courtyard, never going outside of it. And her health is tied to the health of the country. So for example, when the Maoist uprising happened, the Kumari at that time had a series of migraines and got very ill and that kind of thing. So that's one example, or another being, this is something I just happened to see when I was there in December, that the girls of the Nawari people are, at age 8, married off to a jackfruit, symbolically. And so here they are actually in their wedding dresses, their sort of miniature wedding dresses. It was a very fun day for them. So things that I am not used to being from Stowe, Massachusetts. So I was very excited. Everyone there was very excited about the return of the statue. The shrine was bedecked and garlanded with flowers. The Nepali Times and the Kathmandu Times had front page stories about this statue coming back. That day, I mean, you can just see all the boom mics, like Al Jazeera is there and all these other world news services are there. Let's see, and so yeah, here's a guy doing, there's a ritual ahead of time, which he did, and it was not just a ritual of welcome to the god, but also of propitiation, because there is such a sense of guilt for having allowed the god to be stolen by foreigners and taken to a foreign, strange land. So there is actually a kind of a request, you know, like, please forgive us for the fact that we have failed. Which suggests, you know, part of the emotional world of those who are really dealing with the statue as opposed to, say, the Dallas Museum of Art. And so all of these people gathered, hundreds of people gathered in the square, and just imagine this scene, like, well, this is when they're giving speeches ahead of time. I, of course, could not understand a word of them, but it was really amazing, just these sort of thousands of people together in the streets, and then up on the top of the buildings, the monkeys are all staring down at us like, what the hell is up with the humans today? They are really, hey, Cheryl, come over and take a look at this. So then the Lakshmi Narayan statue was placed into this palanquin and raised up on the shoulders of prominent individuals from the community museum directors and that kind of thing, and it was carried on their shoulders through the streets as people sort of were all along the streets were crying and yelling and screaming. And the thing they kept on saying is, the god was homesick. The god has come home. So it was very moving. I was standing next to the American ambassador to Nepal, and he was, he was crying, and I was almost crying. He was probably partially crying because I stepped on his foot and he was wearing suede shoes. But it was very crowded. And also, who the hell wears suede shoes in Nepal? But anyway, there is this important clash here of ideas about art and representation, and this is what I'm getting to. In the American Museum, there is this idea of the aesthetic beauty of this object. You preserve the aesthetic beauty of this in an antiseptic setting so that people can see it. So it is available to a certain set of people. And it is supposed to be isolated in this antiseptic environment. It's temperature controlled, it is humidity controlled so that it cannot possibly deteriorate. Now, American museums are driven crazy by the fact that in situ, when these items are there, the idea is specifically that you are supposed to festoon them with flowers. You're supposed to make daily pujas, kind of acts of worship towards them, where you put like a colored paste on them. This is actually one of the more famous statues in Nepal of Hanuman, the monkey god. If you can't actually make out its features, that's because it has none at this point. It has been revered for hundreds of years. At this point, it's a freaking shapeless mass with a dress on it. It looks accidentally like a face here, but that's only pareidolia or whatever it's called. It's just a lump. And so that's actually what American museums say. Like, if we leave these things in place, they're going to get stolen. They're going to decay. But to the Nepalis themselves, the statue is inhabited by the god. It is about use for them. It's about communication with the divine. It's about a living tradition, not a dead object of art. It would be sort of like if aliens came along and took your dog and they said, we want to have an example of what a human pet looks like. And don't worry, we'll feed it. It will be well fed. Better fed than you can. It'll have a longer life than it will here on Earth. I mean, it will live the whole of its life in a glass box alone. But nonetheless, we will feed it. From the Nepali point of view, our Western view of art as something not to be used, but to be locked up out of context, out of its community, with nothing that's connected to it, in a gallery where it cannot be properly appreciated, that, in fact, is the bizarre and eccentric attitude, not the attitude that the statue has a divinity to it. But it's more than that. It's also about national pride. For centuries, the West assumed its own centrality in the story of humanity. We were the ones who were supposed to look at others. They were not supposed to look at us. We take their treasures so that we can see them. We know better than they do how to take care of these objects. We are the ones who see. They are the ones who are seen. We are the baseline, normal. Everyone else is observed by us. This view is thankfully eroding, and the repatriation of statues is a sign that nations are asserting their sovereignty. They are saying, you can't simply step in and take our cultural heritage. We are allowed to decide what happens to it. For one thing, this statue, the Lakshmi Narayan statue, oh, and here it is, sorry, here it is actually reinstated. This is, I took this photograph the evening after the ceremony. So here you can see the full range of the sort of the sacred string. It's been, banana leaves and things are heaped on it. Oil lights and probably like yak butter lights are lit for it, that kind of thing. So you can, and it's wearing this armor that had been in storage for 40 years by the crestfallen family that was supposed to be taking care of it. Anyway, so here it is celebrated. So the point is, it was actually safe in its unprotected shrine for 500 years before some Western collector got interested in it and arranged for it to be stolen. It is precisely the Western idea of this statue as a dead thing worth a lot of money that led to it being removed from its traditional home. We are not the protectors. We're also undermining the sovereignty of a nation that has openly proclaimed in law that it is illegal to sell religious antiquities across their borders. So here we are confronting here we have the confrontation of two very different philosophies. The colonizing Western view of art and a very different Nepali one. The boy from small town America and a genderless God who is present at creation, floating in a sea of milk. This is one of the things I love about travel. Once you have gone someplace foreign to you, strange to you, it allows you to see how strange to others your home is. And now remember that the word strange literally used to mean foreign. It's like the French word étrange. So I can shake my head at how strange it might seem to have a living goddess or a ritual marriage to a jackfruit, but just a mile from my house in Vermont is a church where the townspeople gathered in 1846 to await the end of the world, for example. So yeah, the people of my town decided that time was about to end on New Year's Eve, 1846. They all gathered here in the sanctuary. They had put a grandfather clock at the front of the sanctuary to count down the final moments of all creation. And they all they gave away everything they owned. They sewed themselves white garments so that they could be lifted into heaven. They thought they were really clever at giving away what they owned because they're like, these fools are going to be stuck here on the earth. They all went here, and then as the chimes began ringing on that bell, on that clock, they started to scream and to wail and to faint. And then like 15 minutes later, they all left the church really, really quiet, realizing that they had given away everything that they had owned. And well, the world was still there the next morning. When I told this story to some Nepalese friends of mine, showing them this picture and stuff, and it was so interesting because their reaction, as you can imagine, to me, this is a standard church. This is a standard New England small town church, right? To them, they're like, wait, where is the ornament? How could you possibly have something that is so dull and plain? And so to explain that, suddenly you have to get into the whole, like the form of that building itself tells you about the history of settlement, white settlement in this country, about the history of Protestantism, about like the fact that Protestantism has this sort of phobia about the flamboyant and the Baroque. This is a profoundly puritanical building. It encrypts a whole history which is particular, which I, of course, took for granted because I was from a small town in America where that was standard. But yet, when you suddenly see it through their eyes, you're like, oh my God, you're right. Where else would you build, would you be proud of that kind of asceticism? My own family is in fact deeply Christian. They are Protestant, many of them are evangelical. For example, my grandmother used to actually hold exorcisms for us. So we have our own strangeness. If we just stop for a minute and consider how we might seem to others looking at us. So even as we interrogate the other, they are interrogating us. Trying to explain to Nepali friends the Christian idea of resurrection of the body. So I was like, yeah, so the idea is that your body arises again on the day of judgment. And they're like, what? So like, if you died of cancer, is that cancer still there? And I was like, no, the cancer wouldn't be there. I mean, that'd be ridiculous. And they're like, but like, what about all the people who've decayed? Is that, and they were like, what about if you died on a day when your hair was bad? Is your hair bad for all eternity? Can you like set a particular moment as your reset, like in a video game? Like, oh, I want to go back to right now, you know? The strange is all around us. We are strange to others. We are strange to ourselves. I have traveled far and wide in my life. I don't have children. I have followed the route of the Albigensian Crusade through southern France. I have gone to the castle where Lancelot of the Lake was supposedly born. It used to be owned by a duke with a wooden leg, and it's haunted. But the funny thing is that it's not haunted by the duke, it's only haunted by his wooden leg. So at night, his wooden leg clumps up the stairs with its best friend, who is a ghost cat. I have been to Tibetan monastic cities in the Himalayas. I have gone on an expedition into the Taklamakan Desert to find the tomb of a Sufi saint. I have whoa, sorry, I didn't realize that that was a video. It didn't work that way before. Yeah, I've attended possession rituals and exorcism rituals in Indonesia and seen men and women supposedly controlled by spirits. That clip, which I thought was actually just a photo, it never did that before. It's from a ceremony held at a boy's circumcision in Java. And it's really good attending like a circumcision ritual because I love parties where you know that at least one person's going to be more miserable than you. So I've gone to all these places. I've seen all these wonders. And yet, what is stranger in the end than coming home after all that travel to my own home, my own known place, and discovering that my neighbor is building a weaponized mechanical spider? I love the fact that Nepal seems to have these stories everywhere, but there are stories everywhere here too. My own house, which was built in 1796, is supposedly haunted by the ghost of a child who wails outside the windows. My feeling was, if it's outside the windows, it's not the homeowner's problem. If we're going to ask questions about other people's surprising attitudes towards sculptures, why not look at the graveyard in the next town over from mine and say, what's this about? It is for a couple. I guess though it doesn't say this, I feel like they really should have written that's all, folks. Or on one mountain over, what about this woman who secretly makes statues of tiny depressed people and hides them all over the woods? Our landscape is full of stories. It's full of strangeness. We just have to open our eyes and look around us. Hell, a lot of you are probably from upstate New York. There is no place on earth stranger than upstate New York. Every time I come here, I hear another story. I'm doing because I've spoken at several of the SUNY schools, and they'll just say to me stuff like, "Oh, by the way, you should just know, like some cracks in the earth have appeared here, and there's a smell of sulfur all over the town. Don't worry about that." Or like the fact that the Jell-O factory is right next to the Cool Whip factory. It's a peculiar place. All right, so let's pause for a moment to just meditate about the things that I've been talking about. We often look outside ourselves, to the foreign, to the other, to see images of the strange. Strange, remember, used to mean foreign. But at the same time, the foreign, the other, is looking back at us. They are commenting on us even as we comment on them. And the idea of us and them is going to be different for each person in any case. So these encounters between the familiar and the unfamiliar, these are the great moments for growth, for new awareness, for rejuvenation. The world all around you is miraculous. You just have to look hard enough to find proof of that. The world is a miraculous and dangerous place. Don't get bored by it, ever. But also, it's not until we travel, either literally or metaphorically, that we can actually see what our home is like. We cannot see our house from inside our house. To see how we live, we must travel to a distant hill and look back. Then, for the first time, we see where we've been living. Think of this in terms of the pandemic. You've all been stuck at home for, a year and a half, 2 years, stuck in a routine with the same people in the same place. It's totally stifling. Nothing new. I can't imagine what it must have been like for some of you. I'm so sorry, actually, that this is the way that you had to experience youth. It really, I'm sorry. It sucks. What can I say? Now you're here, though. Suddenly you have a roommate whose whole life, or you may have a roommate whose whole life is profoundly different than yours, whose beliefs are profoundly different. And suddenly you see your own family in a different way. You no longer can take your parents or your siblings or whoever you live with for granted. Suddenly you see them in a new light. You see the assumptions you've made over the years really were assumptions. T.S. Eliot, in one of his 4 quartets, writes, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So this kind of takes us into the question of literature and what literature is about, and in fact, also the critical writing that you've been exchanging today. It's the same kind of thing. You take something known, like Percy Jackson or Princess Mononoke, and it's something that people take for granted. Suddenly, though, looking at it more carefully, looking at it with a new lens, you start to see that there are different worlds there, that there are different surprises, that the thing that you thought you knew, maybe you didn't know really at all. That's what good critical writing can do, as well as good literature. Like a voyage, literature and good nonfiction writing shows us something new about something we may have taken for granted. It estranges us from what we know just enough so that we can see the topic from a new angle, as if from the first time. So one of the best theoretical discussions of this is by a Russian formalist by the name of Viktor Shklovsky, who was writing in the early 20th century. And he wrote, "After we see an object several times, we begin to recognize it. The object is in front of us, and we know about it, but we do not see it anymore. Hence, we cannot say anything significant about it. Habitualization devours works, clothes, furniture, one's wife, and the fear of war. And art exists that one may recover the sensation of life as it exists, to make one feel things, to make the stone stony. The purpose of art is to impart the sensation of things as they are perceived, and not as they are known. The technique of art is to make objects unfamiliar." So Shklovsky, this is his theory is in particular. So he is someone who lived through World War I, and and because of that experience, I mean, we talk about both the things that connect us with others, but also the differences. Oh, a good word in this instance is alterity, if this is not one you've heard, A-L-T-E-R-I-T-Y, which is the irreducible difference between yourself and another person in a philosophical discussion. So alterity. But one element of alterity, as it were, with Shklovsky is he had lived through World War I, then the Russian Revolution, the Russian Civil War, and as a result, his concept of this is extremely kind of brutal. He says, usually we walk around taking the air for granted. We can't see it, we can't feel it, we can't smell it. It is vital to our lives, but we can't actually even perceive it. We forget it's there. So it is the artist's job to fill the room with poison gas, he says. You are supposed to poison the air so that others suddenly have to labor to breathe. And by laboring to breathe, they remember what air is. So it is a very brutal idea. He talks about literature being roughening things. Literature roughens things so that suddenly you have to think about things that you took for granted before. But I think at base, though, this idea that he says here, the technique of art is to make objects unfamiliar. That seems to me an extremely valuable idea. And also, incidentally, one that works with academic writing, too. Good academic writing, there are sometimes complaints about the lingo of academic writing. And I agree that people sometimes hide behind that lingo because they don't actually have anything to say. But on the other hand, there is a way that, as in poetry, simply the use of words that force you to re-examine something, it has its own value. Suddenly you can look at Percy Jackson or whatever and say, oh, wait, I'm not simply going to think of it as the experience I had with this book when I was 11. I'm actually, through this other language that's being used as a lens, I'm now seeing this in a different way. So I do think that there's legitimacy to that. Good writing takes you on a voyage by mixing the familiar with the unfamiliar. So the strange becomes familiar, and the familiar becomes strange. A lot of people are saying right now that literature is a mirror, but also a window. I think it's a really important and good phrase. That yes, literature is of course supposed to be a mirror. It shows you yourself. It shows the reader themselves. But there are also times when it has to be a window, When I'm reading a novel by an Indonesian author or something, the daily life, the routine that they take for granted is obviously not the one that I do. And so therefore, I don't simply need the book to mirror my own experience. That is to say, it doesn't need to be about like a middle-aged guy who eats donut gems, which incidentally are a very good donut. Cheap, too, for a whole hell of a lot of them. They come in a bag. Anyway, the difference in their life, the alterity there, the book becomes a window through which I can see those lives, and then, as with windows, you catch finally a glimpse of your own reflection in it, in a way that surprises you, superimposed on a landscape that you did not know before. So when people say books can be a mirror, but also a window, that is a very important idea right now that really is being discussed, especially in terms of like, who are the communities of readers? Who do you assume is your reader? Who does, do you feel this book is written for you or for someone else? Even things like if you are writing a book, you know, a lot of, I remember Junot Diaz, in fact, complaining. He was like, you know, if you put a word in Spanish in a book, everyone bitches about it, but you can have a word in fucking Elvish in there and everyone will be like memorizing it and singing it to their harp, you know what I mean? Like, you know, dressed as Galadriel. Okay, so I'm going to talk is that no, that's not an accurate, well, how can I find out what time it is? 3:50, okay. So I'm going to talk just very quickly then. We got started a little late, but so I'm going to talk just whiz through just how this plays out in a few of my books as the final section of this lecture. This idea of the defamiliarization. So the book which actually y'all have back there, a small stack of, The Pox Party, and in its sequel, The Kingdom on the Waves, this is a sort of a duology called The Astonishing Life of Octavian Nothing, Traitor to the Nation. The idea is that these books, I'm about to ruin about the first 50 pages. The first book is supposed to, in fact, evoke in many ways like a Gothic fantasy. I am deliberately, as it were, estranging the reader from what they know. It reads like a Gothic fantasy. There's a captured princess. There's a castle somewhere on an island. It is, in fact, as the reader slowly recognizes, a somewhat familiar scene. It comes into focus slowly. It is actually Boston on the eve of the American Revolution. So Boston, at least, being my home, it's a very familiar place. It is the place I call home. And yet at the same time, I'm specifically trying to kind of estrange it through detail. And the purpose of that is because I feel like we don't actually look at, like the moment someone says the American Revolution, we have a whole set of props. Suddenly there's a guy in a three-corner hat, there's the light coming down from heaven, right on a guy in a wig who's going like this. You know what I mean? Like there's a whole set of things that immediately appear. And I was like, what if we look at the American Revolution, and me as a writer doing this as an investigation, what if I force myself to see it not as we know it now in hindsight, but rather to instead say, I want to look at this thinking about how people didn't know that they were going to win. It was an incredibly stupid idea for these colonists to confront the most powerful army in the world at that time. And what does it mean for those who were not actually allowed to partake in freedom as the country was going through this turmoil? So that was sort of the idea, to sort of estrange readers from what they know so that by the time they understand where they are, they have a different view of it. Similarly, Feed, for example, is a novel which uses science fiction to talk about very real issues of consumerism and technology. And then in Landscape with Invisible Hand, which is being made into a movie, this is another satire. The idea of this one is that Earth has become just a backwater in some other alien race's financial empire. So, and it is in fact quite literally, and I wonder why should humans always be at the center of the galactic civilization? The great galactic empire, the interplanetary federation, somehow we're always there. What if in reality, we're just one of those weird provincial species we see in the background of the alien cantina? So the book literally combines a very banal and familiar landscape, suburban Rhode Island, strip malls and cul-de-sacs, with the alien, these weird floating cities and extraction structures you can see on the horizon. The book is told entirely in landscape paintings, as a series of landscape paintings. It's about a kid who wants to be an artist. He and his girlfriend make money through performing their own lives for an alien audience of subscribers. The idea is the aliens, because they reproduce by budding, find it really weird that we have this whole system of romance. Why do you people walk on the beach holding hands? It makes no sense to them. So these kids realize that they actually can get subscribers by acting out their own romance. By essentially sort of like going through the whole like, sweetie, I love you so much. I love you so much. Let's go to the sock hop. So so essentially this becomes sort of their method of income, which also means then that when inevitably they want to break up and they freaking hate each other, they can't, because they have to continue to perform romance for these aliens in order to actually have an income. So I was using elements of the alien and the unfamiliar to create a really intense version of something I think we all know right now, the way that we're all trying to sell ourselves these days. Your life at this point has to be curated like art for display online. You always are trying to prove you're leading a fantastic life, even if your life seems incredibly boring or even unhappy to you. So I wanted to capture the feeling, that anxiety. And I did so, or tried to do so, through a story that heightens all of those things, that makes them weird, so that suddenly you go, oh, but that's how we live already. That's what it already feels like. And as mentioned, it's becoming a movie with Asante Black and Tiffany Haddish. I went down to the set a few weeks ago and saw them shooting. I'm in a scene briefly. I'm in a line waiting for soup. And just as a good anecdote about how we do not recognize the world we're in, so it was being shot at a strip mall outside in Atlanta, Georgia. And I knew that it was all like filled with set pieces. But I did not notice until like most of the way through the day that above this there were these billboards. And like thousands of Atlanta commuters are driving back and forth on the highway right next to us. But the billboards actually were for alien food supplements and a pawn shop where you could sell your own organs. And so it's just so funny because I just took it for granted. It's a billboard. Who's going to look at that? But there it is. So so anyway, once again, a thing that is sort of right under our eyes. And then I'm not really going to talk about Symphony for the City of the Dead. It's a nonfiction book about the siege of Leningrad during World War II and this composer who was trapped inside the city. But I will simply say, especially looking at the photographs, that they saw their own city turned into a kind of an alien landscape, a nightmarish landscape that combined the things they knew with the unknown. And that I feel like it's ironic right now simply because the Russians themselves are, of course, now doing this in Ukraine. Doing the same thing, the same kind of transformation of cities into hellscapes and into the world of nightmares. So anyway, so that book is about this this composer who actually got trapped inside that city and wrote a symphony about those attacks. So art, writing, music, all of these things can transform our world. They can change realities. By encountering the familiar, by encountering the unfamiliar, we learn to think in new ways and to assess how we've been living so far. This is where success lies, but also it's where the joy lies. You are growing into adulthood at a difficult time. I don't envy you. In many ways, everything seems strange all the time now. There is no normal. But this is why it's particularly important for you not to take the world for granted right now. Keep asking questions like the ones you've been doing today. Seek out the stories all around you. Near and far, familiar and bizarre. This is a wondrous world and a dangerous one. Keep your eyes open and listen to what is said around you by those who are nothing like you. That's where the route to the future lies. Every moment is potentially a moment of adventure. Seize it in your writing, and in your life, you will only get one chance. And that is a strange and beautiful thing. Thank you. Okie dokie, artichoke. I can answer questions if there are any. Otherwise, there's so few of us, you can just come and talk to me. So.
I really wanted to hear your story about Shostakovich.
Yeah, you can, for only $12.99. Yeah.
I love what you were saying about Shklovsky, who is, the perfect person to use for what you were saying, and this discussion of the familiar and the strange, and this is true for fiction that we do not consider to be YA fiction, and it is true for YA fiction. And I wonder, and I don't say this critically at all because these are some of my favorite books, but what made you want to be a YA author? Why do you gravitate toward that, let's say, readership?
Oh, well, originally because I was a totally emotionally crippled teenager, and therefore I needed to work through that, I guess. I wish that there was a more interesting answer, but that really is the truth. And I actually do feel like people who write for young people are either people who have children or people who are children internally. And I am definitely, and then there are some, and I think they're the lucky few who are both. And that's really an amazing combo. I happen to only be a child. Yeah.
There's a follow-up, which is going to sound like a leading question, and I don't mean it to be, but do you feel that that genre gives you a certain type of freedom in any way, or
No.
does it have nothing to do with that?
No, I don't think it gives me a freedom. If anything, it occasionally, occasionally there's a barrier there because I feel like, oh, this is not an idea that would be interesting to a teen reader or, whatever. So yeah.
Although you managed to make Shostakovich and the Siege of Leningrad.
Well, I know, but see, with the Shostakovich book, I knew I totally would have gotten into that as like a 16-year-old.
Right.
Like that was why I decided to write it in that form. I was like, oh my God, there are all these insane stories. Like it was, that. So he wrote this symphony, and then it was actually smuggled out. 1 second. Smuggled out on an airplane through on trucks and airplanes in microfilm form through the Middle East to be sent to the U.S., where it was then used to perform the symphony here to kind of rouse up interest in the Russian cause, and like that kind of thing. Like it deals with microfilm, and in particular the weirdness of it being music instead of like the plan for a submarine or the Enigma code or something. That I thought, I totally would have loved that shit as a teenager. So I was like, no, of course this would be a good book for that reason. Yeah. Yes. Oh yeah, I mean a lot. I don't even know where to start, but I would say that probably my favorite is Ray Bradbury. At the time, or the one that I feel is most closely connected to what I do. I think even just the kind of assumption of science fiction that then comments somehow on how we live now, on America. I mean, his book, The Martian Chronicles, is supposedly about Mars, but is really absolutely about America. And and I still find that book incredibly powerful. So he, I guess, is who I would recommend. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I haven't listened since people are asking about the Shostakovich book.
Yeah.
There seems to be some sort of Shostakovich pottery that I suppose.
Oh, that was going to be a joke. Yeah, it was a joke. It was a joke. I don't want to drag people through a part of the thing that I deleted, but Yeah, just because, you know, I was like, whoa, who would have thought it would be a good idea to write about Shostakovich? I was like, look, you know, of course it is. Like, it was 2012. It seemed like a good idea to write about someone who looked like Harry Potter. Yes.
More of a general question, but I know that you write for a living, and like I love Goodreads, and I'm always on it, and I'm always looking at authors and stuff. You have a lot of ratings on your books and stuff, and as you've gotten more popular, how do you deal with backlash, like not hate, but negative comments towards your books? Because for me, like I know constructive criticism is good for my work, but I hate it. Like, and it's so bad. It's like so bad, but I don't like receiving it. But
No.
for a living, like you have to receive it so you have your book published, and then
Yeah.
you hear from the public about what people think about your reading.
Ah, but you
writing.
don't because you don't have a Goodreads account. That's exactly what I do. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly have no idea what people say about me on Goodreads because I don't go on there. But and Twitter, I dropped off of not because I ever got caught in the sort of the Twitter hailstorm, but I just was so sick of the constant mean-spiritedness. I was like, this is a place that could become a nexus for community, and instead it's just constant frickin' poison. So I actually stopped going on Twitter. I was quite happy though when I went on Twitter the first time, I discovered that someone else had been impersonating me on Twitter for about a year and a half. And it was great because they had creepily followed my movements so they could be like, speaking at my own high school today. And I was like, yeah, I really did speak at my high school that day. Huh. But so I was, except for the fact that their use of grammar was not one that I would approve of. I actually was kind of excited about them doing that for me. But no, and you know, but the question about criticism is real, and no, well, not no. I'm sure, like, it's always hard. You know, I remember the worst reviews that I got in intimate detail while forgetting all of the good reviews. The worst one was about that book, The Pox Party. The review was called A Pox on the Pox Party, the National Book Award winner you shouldn't read. So it really was quite a negative review. The only good part of it was that it opened with a paragraph saying, everyone seems to love this book. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and then they had links to all of those articles. I'm like, yeah, keep it up, my friends. But no, and I mean, that's a really legitimate thing to say. And part of it is you need to find friends or colleagues who you can exchange your writing with or give your writing to who are loving, who therefore you can know if they say, hey, I think you should do this, where they're coming at it from is not this is what I would like to see, but rather for what you want to accomplish, this is perhaps something you could think about. That's what I would say, yeah.
I have a question on being on the Justice list.
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice that the sales in your books kind of spike after being on the list?
Oh, no, I didn't notice. No. Well, because, you know, one of the depressing things about being a writer is that you only get your payments once every 6 months, and they are delayed 3 months from the payment period. So I never really can figure out what the hell is going on. I just get the check and cash it. Yeah.
I just have more of a general writer question. But I'm an aspiring writer, and I have a few ideas kicking around for things, but just I find the biggest trouble I have is like sticking with an idea. You know, what's your secret? How do you stick with something and continue writing it?
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I think that for one thing, remember that short stories tend to be very focused on maybe just two things, but a longer project, you're gonna have to have a bunch of stuff in there. Like you can't follow just one thread in a novel. And I think that oftentimes when people say like, I run out of steam after 30 or 40 pages, that's exactly about the length of time before you run out of sort of the one idea. And I kind of feel like it's like, I always get this image of puppies. If you have one puppy, yeah, it can be around for an hour and it can entertain itself. But you're really going to need a second puppy in there and then they start to frisk around and play, and so I don't know. That's what I would say is that don't necessarily think of, is there a way, an exciting way to take two of the ideas? Because you're saying it's not just that the idea runs out, but that something else comes along, right? Yeah, and I would just say, sit down and think to yourself hard at that point, hey, is there some way that I can make thing A connect with thing B, because that might, that might actually be really exciting for you as well as the reader. To put both of them in there and to see how they bounce off each other. And I think that's kind of what's necessary in a novel. Yeah. All right. Well, and if you have any other questions, of course, I still will be here. Just I will turn off this microphone. So, all right. Thank you so much. Bye.